Good morning, Liberty. We are live. It is Monday morning, January the 7th, 2019, the second show of the year for us here on Good Morning Liberty. Thank you for being here. I'm getting ready to roll for a Monday morning. I hope you had a great weekend and you're looking forward to a lot of interesting stuff on the show this week. We are broadcasting back to normal live Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, as we have in the past, now that we're through the holiday season. So I really appreciate you joining me here, whether it's live through YouTube or in the archives on any of our other channels, BitChute, BitTube, Brighteon.com, Keyport, Facebook, Twitter, or wherever. Of course, we post all of our show notes and archives on our website over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. That is the best place to start if you want to catch up on some of the shows or even do some research on some of the things that I talk about here on the program, or find reference links and the like. Today I want to talk a little bit about the right to keep and bear arms, specifically since we are getting into the beginning parts of what we call the nullification season. This is the time when most state legislatures are around the country are in session, so then we see legislation that's introduced. I know a lot of people are talking about bills by Ms. Cortez in Washington, D.C., and others. I know there was a bill to repeal Obamacare finally introduced by some Republicans now that they can't get it through again. So instead of talking about the garbage in Washington, D.C., we spend our effort, for those of you who follow us, we spend our effort working on a state or a local level to get legislation passed or actions, whether it's legislation or individual actions, that will advance liberty, whether Washington, D.C. wants to give us permission to or not. And I think that is really the most important thing, because liberty isn't about getting a permission slip. So for all of us who have gotten a permission slip to drive, we don't have the liberty to drive. We're getting an approval from the government. Same with a gun permit or a marriage license, for example. It really is all about getting permission. Now, if you really want to express liberty, you do that whether or not government wants you to. And I've often mentioned one of my favorite quotes on this show from Thomas Jefferson, and I'm going to kind of go from the top of my head, but he basically said, and this was, I think, from 1774, he said, "A free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as a gift of their chief magistrate." So if you are free, you act free, whether government wants you to or not. Now, that doesn't mean that's always the best strategy, because government is extremely dangerous. And when they don't want you to be free, they can bring down a lot of force upon you. So, of course, again, back to Jefferson, when he sent a letter to James Madison about passage of the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798 to start the process of nullifying the Alien and Sedition Acts, he sent him a letter. He said, we should hold to our principles. We should always hold that these are totally illegal, unconstitutional, null and void, and we can resist them at every turn. But we also have to keep in mind strategy. And he said specifically to push as far as events will render prudent. I think Donald Trump actually uses this strategy to some degree. In general, I don't like what he does on a lot of things, but as I noted on my show on Friday, I am very supportive of the idea of getting out of Syria, which has gotten a lot of ire for the man. But what he has done, I think that's what we can learn from him that's very effective, is that he oftentimes says, and I think I'm seeing a pattern here, maybe someone else does this as well, but I think I see a pattern. He throws out some of the most outrageous things. And I have a feeling he does this as a negotiating tactic. He throws out the most outrageous thing that, hey, if everybody goes along with it and I get what I want, fine, but I'm assuming I'm not going to. So then when he backs down to something less, which is maybe what the original goal was, everybody thinks that's the moderate one. And I think a lot of people do this in the business world. Oh, you want to sell something for $10,000, so you ask for 20, and then when you come down to 12, people are like, whew, at least it wasn't $20,000. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm thinking about strategy on getting things to move forward. So it's not only important to push forward on what we can get done immediately, but it's kind of a combination. You have to think about what you can get done immediately, what your ultimate goal is, and then also what you can do in the short term as far as like maybe ramping things up and being willing to step back. Because whenever you're trying to advance liberty, and I can tell you after doing this for over a decade, 12 years now in the state legislatures, even the smallest thing gets pushback. So you have to use that strategy of going for a little bit more than what you think you can get, or a lot more. If you go too far, they won't even consider it. But if you go a bit more, at least when you get the pushback, you've got some room behind you to step back and still get something positive. Again, that's Jefferson's strategy of pushing as far as events will render prudent. So over into the live chat for those of you who are watching over on YouTube. I love the live chat. I got the idea for doing this through my nephews who are always on YouTube, watching my friend Robert Scott Bell do his weekly or daily radio show, 6 days a week radio show on health freedom through YouTube. So I really love enjoy chatting with the people who are here in the live chat. It's really cool. And for those of you who leave comments later on, I do read all the comments in the archives, and I appreciate the feedback. So I want to say hi to Existence, JP Bochi, EHP Training, Joseph Standridge, Logan Boydell, everybody here. I'm very grateful for you spending some time with me, and good morning and happy Monday to you. So yesterday was an interesting anniversary as we get into this permission not needed mentality. And we posted a meme over on our Facebook, Twitter, Minds.com accounts. Well, I don't think it went to Minds. I really should have done it. We don't post as much on Minds because we don't have a huge following. We're only up to a few hundred followers there on Minds.com. But I like that it's a nice alternative to what's going on in the NSA enablers of Facebook at all. But yesterday was an interesting anniversary, and we tend to post this meme almost every year on January the 6th. And let me pull it up for you, those of you who are watching either live or in the archives. That George and Martha Washington were married on January 6th, 1759. And I always found it interesting that they had a private and religious ceremony, and it had nothing to do with getting a government license. So it's just one of these reminders of this mentality that if they wanted to be together and they had particular religious beliefs, the government should have nothing to do with this engagement of marriage. It has nothing to do with it. It was between them, their God, their families, their church, whatever. And the permission slip that government injects into it is just a way to, I guess it's putting government at the top of the list where it really shouldn't be. So I love that reminder that there was no license needed. But that gets me into our discussion today about constitutional carry. I don't like the phrase constitutional carry when it talks about having basically permitless carry. I think permitless carry is a better name for the bills. But a lot of people call it that, so we continue to call it constitutional carry. The mentality, I think, behind the phrase constitutional carry is that the only gun permit you need is the Second Amendment. And I hear people post, or I see people post this on social media all the time. The only gun permit I need was approved in 1791 or shall not be infringed in the Second Amendment. But the problem with that is that the Second Amendment was never written as a gun permit. It was written to restrain government. Well, the text doesn't restrain government. It was written to give rules that the government isn't supposed to cross, and then it's up to the people and the states to restrain the government from there. So our right to keep and bear arms, it's very important to do the reminder, is a natural right. For those of you who believe in God, it's a God-given right. If you believe in nature, it comes from our nature, from our birthright. Whatever you believe in, it exists. We have the right. It exists whether government wants us to have that right or not. Now, in most of the world, government is extremely hostile to that right. Here in the United States, I think government at all levels, personally, is very hostile. But it doesn't get to act as hostile as it wants to because so many people have been exercising this right. It's part of the culture for so many years. I would think, and I'm not an expert on this, I would think that being part of the culture is being whittled away. I know I grew up in a gun-free zone, basically. Not that my parents were opposed to it, but I wasn't exposed to firearms as a child. My grandfather hunted, so I thought of gun rights as something that you do, to talk about, or like we talk about hunting. I wasn't exposed to it, so I was uncomfortable. I was frightened of firearms. I wasn't really around them. And I hear from people who grew up many years before I did, and I used to listen to a guy who passed away some years ago, Harry Brown, a great libertarian author. And he talked about in the old days, in grade school, you'd have gun safety classes, and kids would walk to school with their firearms. Now, that creates a culture of safety because people are learning how to use these weapons, which are all over the place. And it also creates a sense of normalcy, that it isn't only the crazies that are carrying a weapon. Over in the chat, oh, cool. Matt Gertler is here. He said he pre-filed House Bill 2 for constitutional carry in Georgia State. I actually have this on my list to cover. We're very grateful for your legislation, Mr. Gertler. And I think some of the language in it is really empowering. It really kind of, it reinforces, I'll get to it in a little bit, but it reinforces some of the reason for this. Also, hi to Matthew Butts over in the chat. So I'm rambling on this idea, but I think it's important for people to exercise their rights. It is not necessarily a constitutional right. This is a natural right. But we continue to use the phrase because people understand what it means. So I want to talk about some of the legislation that's been introduced in a number of states. We're talking about Texas, Georgia, Oklahoma, and South Carolina so far. Now, most states are not even filing legislation for another few days. This week and next week, we're going to see a number more bills introduced in states around the country. I like the idea of this for two reasons. One, first of all, the states are awful. So if you can clear out code on the books in the states that attack the right to keep and bear arms on the state level, that's positive for liberty. But it also helps create, and we've covered this a little bit on the 10th Amendment Center website, and I talk about it a little bit. Mike Meharry, who does a lot of our writing and reporting, and TJ Martinell, who does a lot of our right to keep and bear arms blogging and writing, cover this in more detail than I normally do. But it also creates an environment that's hostile to federal gun control. And I think that's where I want to start in this conversation here. Let me just switch over here. We're going to pass up George and Martha. But in this report from the Texas constitutional carry bill from Jonathan Stickland, which I'll get back to in a moment, is that, and I think this one was written by TJ. No, this one's by Mike. A lot of times they use a lot of the same language in these reports because it's really covering the same principles. And Mike writes this, quote, while permitless carry bills do not directly affect federal gun control, they don't affect federal gun control. It's not like they're saying, oh, the bump stock ban is unconstitutional, so we're not going to participate in it. Or the National Firearms Act of 1934 shouldn't exist, so we're going to nullify it. So this isn't a direct attack or a direct pushback on federal gun control, but it still actually affects the federal government's ability to enforce more gun control in the future. So we have to think about what's going on the federal level with gun control. And I've covered the bump stock ban from the Trump administration, repeatedly talked about the fact that no federal gun control measure, not one, should exist under the Constitution and the Second Amendment. None of them should exist. The ATF should be disbanded. That's the only thing that it's authorized to do under the Constitution, is get rid of itself. But a constitutional or permitless carry bill still affects the federal government's ability to actually enact more gun control in the future. And here's how Mike puts it. While permitless carry bills do not directly affect federal gun control, widespread passage of permitless concealed carry laws, or permitless open carry laws, really, in states subtly undermines federal efforts to regulate guns. And he goes on. As we've seen with marijuana and industrial hemp, a federal regulation becomes ineffective when states ignore it and pass laws encouraging the prohibited activity anyways. And even more so when people take action to say, I am exercising this right, even though the federal government says I can't. There's only so many people that the federal government can muster up to enforce their laws. And of course, talking about the idea of kids who used to carry rifles over their back on the way to school for their gun safety course, the more that people are open carrying, the more that people learn that guns are a way to defend yourself and your family and your property against the bad guys. I had a friend tell me yesterday, I went to go to the range yesterday, the first time in a while, and he's a longtime leftist progressive. And it was his idea, let's go shoot. In fact, he started hitting me up to do this on a regular basis once Trump got elected. And I think that was kind of his wake-up call on this. And he said to me last night, he's like, I think about this when my progressive friends say, don't go to the gun range. Now, he and I don't probably agree on a lot of things, but I think he understands the idea of federalism, and I think this is what I think is the most interesting. He said to me last night, I tell my progressive friends who say, why are you going to the gun range? Like you're going to be with all the crazies. And he says, okay, well, do you like Trump supporters? And of course, they all say no. He says, do you trust them? And they all say no. He says, what about the police? Do you trust them? Most of them say no. And he says, well, I'm with you. And guess who has all the guns? And maybe we should have guns too. And it's very unusual, I think, to hear progressives have this mentality. But that whatever your political viewpoint is, that's the approach that you should have. It's like, no, you don't only want your opponents to have the firearms. You don't only want government to have the firearms. Because that creates a balance of power that's extremely dangerous to whatever you believe in, no matter what you believe in. You don't have to be a libertarian to think that that's the right approach to protect your rights, because when it gets down to it, that is the approach that everybody should really take. So I was actually surprised to hear that. I thought it was really awesome, and I hope that kind of mentality catches on with other people. And it doesn't go away when the Democrats take full power in Washington, D.C. again, because it shouldn't just be about the moment now. It has to think more long-term about our rights. So Mike goes on, and he says, the federal government lacks the enforcement power necessary to maintain its ban. He's talking about marijuana and industrial hemp. Hemp is not banned anymore, but at the time he wrote this. And people will willingly take on the small risk of federal sanctions if they know the state will not interfere. This increases when the state actively encourages the market. He says less restrictive state gun laws will likely have a similar impact on federal gun laws. It will make it that much more difficult for the feds to enforce any future federal gun control because it becomes more part of day-to-day society. I was so scared of guns, I didn't want to be around them. I know my grandfather used them, but when I first went, it was such an uncomfortable experience. I still have a level of discomfort because it just hasn't been part of my fiber, and I think you can build that up. And I think the first time I saw someone open carrying in New Hampshire, it was a very uncomfortable new situation. Oh, wow, okay. Instead of thinking like, oh, okay, I'm in the safest room in the country. That's what I said when I spoke at the 25th Annual Gun Rights Policy Conference. It was back in San Francisco, of all places, I think in 2010 or 2009. I recognized by that point, oh, hey, I'm in the safest place possible. Because if there's one bad dude that comes in and tries to go crazy, he's going to be put down pretty quickly. So the idea of expanding liberty, getting the state out of the way on the state level, also helps push back and create a culture where attacks on the liberty from the federal level are much more difficult. I hope that makes sense. Over in the live chat, Existence says, if you ever come around Mike and Clay's home, I'll bring you all out here and let you blow some stuff up at my home. That is awesome. So that's Mike Meharry and Clay Davis, JP Bocci. I'm not sure if you follow politics in other countries, so feel free to ignore this. Brazilian president is seriously talking about rolling back gun control. Well, I think even though that's not necessarily part of what our work is, the idea that other countries may beat us to the punch on getting rid of some gun control instead of adding to it, I think that creates pressure on activists here. So it's good to actually spread that word. I did not realize that that was actually happening there. And JP points out that the sad part is that the argument is mostly utilitarian. I wish we could establish a real right to keep and bear arms culture there. I took the same kind of position when I was talking about Trump's motivation to pull out of Syria. He's talking about primarily on a financial level. The other countries aren't contributing, so why would we stick around? Rather than focusing on the constitutional issues or the liberty issues of engaging in all these foreign wars. So I agree, but I'm glad to see people take positive steps, even if their motivation isn't totally in the right place. EHP training, come over to EHP training. I got to visit Alabama at some point. My partner, Sarah, her aunt lives there. She says, I'll get you over your fears. I'm slowly getting better. I'm pretty bad, but I really believe in not just talking about things, but trying to learn how to do things the right way. So let's talk about some of this legislation. Now that I've been talking for like 20 minutes just on philosophy, I think it's important for all of us. If you live in any of the states that we're covering, it's important to contact by phone both your state senator and state representative, unless, of course, you're in Nebraska where you just have senator. And whatever bill number I'm going to cover here, say, hey, you know what? This bill, HB 357 in Texas, for example, I want you to support this. Will you co-sign this? Even if they're the bad guys, call them anyways. And then follow up with an email in a week or two. If you don't hear anything back, if you have to leave a message and they don't call you back, send an email. Or send an email first and then wait a few days and call. Did you get my email? The phone calls are a huge deal in getting this type of bill passed. Any type of bill on a state or a local level, especially on the state level, a lot of times these legislators never get more than 10, 15 calls on anything. It's not like Washington, D.C., where the switchboards sometimes get thousands and thousands and thousands upon calls. Like, for example, the bankster bailouts back during the Bush era. It was recorded that 90-some%, if not higher, were opposed to them. And because they're getting so many calls, they're not really paying attention. They just do what they want anyways. On a state or a local level, it can actually have a big impact because they don't have those kinds of systems in place. And when a handful of people call, all of a sudden they're thinking, oh my goodness, it's a big deal here. Now, don't call people in other states because then they're going to just ignore everything. And we've seen some activist groups actually use this approach. I think one of them was Convention of States Project. They're trying to get a convention to amend the Constitution, which I don't think is personally a good strategy at this point. But they can be very good with grassroots organizing. Where I think they have done some bad job is a lot of times you'll see, and I'm not sure if this is organized from the top there, but I've seen organizers from various states say, hey, let's flood state of X, Idaho, or whatever it is. And people are calling from all over the country. And in my experience, when legislators are getting calls from out of state, they just ignore everything and a lot of times it'll make them oppose whatever you want them to support, unless they're really on board philosophically. Most of them are crap, so you can't count on them to be the good guys. So you don't want to create an environment where they're just going to dig their heels in and say, I'm voting no on this. So using some smart strategy. Matt Gertler, come to Tiger, Georgia. We'll get you thoroughly accustomed to firearms. I will come visit at some point. Thank you for the invite. That's awesome. And EHP Training in the chat says, I'll send you a copy of Alabama's constitutional carry bill as soon as it's filed. Second Amendment Preservation Act is looked at hard by some representatives. Thank you. I'll keep you posted. Awesome. Awesome. Just shoot me an email as soon as you get to, and that is a pun intended. Shoot me an email on that as soon as you can. So the strategy of following up and supporting this legislation is extremely important. So let's talk about in Texas. I did mention this on a show back in 2018, not too long ago, a few months ago, talking about creating gun rights sanctuary states. But this is part and parcel of the entire process. House Bill 357, which is an awesome bill number. One of my friends rented a 357 last night at the range at the Los Angeles Gun Club, which is, man, these guys are amazing there, especially in a place like downtown LA. These guys are really good. at getting beginners and newbies like me and my friends to feel comfortable at the range. So they're really patient and they'll take the time with us, which is really cool. So Jonathan Stickland, he filed House Bill 357 on November 14th. It's going to get a committee assignment soon. Let me click through and see if it's got anything yet. It has not gone to a committee. And just to read through this, it says specifically, except as otherwise provided by this chapter or other law, a person 21 years of age or older who is not prohibited from possessing a firearm under Section 46.04 is not prohibited from carrying a concealed handgun or partially or wholly visible handgun in a holster. So it's concealed or open carry in Texas if this passes. Basically, permitless. He's basically saying, look, you don't have to get a permit. It says, quote, a peace officer on top of this may not disarm or detain a person solely because the person is carrying a handgun. And then, of course, and I think this happens, and maybe Matthew can point out whether this is included in the bill in Georgia as well, that a lot of people have some logistical concerns about this type of legislation where reciprocity deals with other states require you to have a license. So if you travel and then all of a sudden there's no permit required in the state of Texas, then maybe if you go to another state, and I'm not sure how they work. Let's say you go to Minnesota, and the deal with Minnesota, I'm not sure if they have one, but if there's reciprocity with Minnesota, they say, show us your license. Well, then you're out of luck. What happens if you travel? You know, Texas can't change what Minnesota does. So the bill does provide for this. It allows people, if they want to get a permit. So that way, if they are traveling with their firearm, they're not going to have problems, or they'll be less likely to have problems in the other state that really wants to see this. So this is very positive. If you live in Texas, email and call, whatever order, whether it's a call or an email first, both your state senator and state representative, tell them you are in favor of House Bill 357 in Texas. Just do a Google search, Texas legislature, and you'll be able to dig around a little bit on the website and type in your address and look up who represents you there or who is pretending to represent you there in Texas. But make sure you take those actions. And then tell other people. I've got all the links to these over in the show notes here on YouTube, and of course over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. There's a link to the report here, and then every time you read one of these reports, and if you see here and you're watching where I have this yellow highlight, it says Representative Jonathan Stickland pre-filed House Bill 357, and then in parentheses it says HB 357, and it's a little bit in red. That's the clickable link to the bill itself. And so that takes you right to the bill. You want to send this over to other people and say, hey, please contact your state rep and state senator here in Texas and ask them to support this. It's going to take a lot of work. There's been a lot of opposition, even in those states that are supposedly gun rights friendly. So House Bill 357 in Texas is very positive. The second bill, as I've mentioned, and Matthew Gertler has been pointing out here in the live chat, appreciate him stopping in, is over in Texas. This report was done by T.J. Martinell back on December 5th. Representative Matt Gertler pre-filed House Bill 2, and you can see the link there as well to go right to the legislation there in Georgia. He pre-filed it back in November. The session starts pretty soon, so that bill hopefully will get assigned to a committee pretty quickly. I know in some states, like Missouri, for example, they aren't required to assign everything to a committee within a particular time frame. So the Speaker of the House, for example, if they're really bad, what they'll do is they wait, like in Missouri, it's required that the Speaker assign every bill to a committee, but the Speaker's not given a time frame. So what they do strategically, and they're really underhanded about this, they wait to the last day of the legislative session, and then they take all the bills that they don't like personally or from legislators that they don't like personally, and they assign them to committee on the last day of the session when there's no chance for it to get assigned to a committee hearing, a committee vote, and then passed out of committee and sent to the to the House or the Senate and go through the whole process. It's basically a way to kill the legislation. So maybe Matt has some insight on whether or not this is going to be assigned quickly or not. And either way, feel free to email us, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. If anybody watching or anybody following any of these bills that I'm talking about, if you get any updates on bills being assigned to a committee or a committee hearing or a vote, let us know, because then what we like to do is we send out email action alerts to people in that particular state. People who are on our email list at 10thamendmentcenter.com/register will send out an action alert. So if there's a committee and there's 6 or 7 people on that committee, we know it needs 4 votes to pass. We'll email you with the 4 or the 7 people on the committee and ask you to call all of them, give you a phone number and an email address. Because again, if they get 15 calls and it's not a really busy session, or they're not getting a lot of calls on things, that could actually turn the tide. Gertler says, HB2 doesn't do away with the permit, so someone can still get it and have reciprocity. It allows law-abiding citizens to carry in Georgia open or concealed without the permit. And I think that is actually a really good strategy. Thank you for the update on that. That is really the best strategy. Basically, you remove any restriction or you allow whatever change in law is necessary on a state level for people to do this, open or concealed on a state level, but then also keep the mechanism in place, recognizing that most other states aren't moving in this direction yet. You have to lead by example, and then allow people, for those people who want to travel, to get a permit to still do it so they can actually have that document to show to the other state. Hi to RS Bell Media Channel. That's my friend Robert Scott Bell, who I mention all the time on this show, who gave me the idea really of doing this show here on YouTube by watching his 6-day-a-week, oftentimes 6-day-a-week radio show that he does through YouTube. So love you, Robert. Thank you for being here. So some of the text in House Bill 2 in Georgia I thought was absolutely awesome. And TJ put it in his report back in December. And he points out that it allows anyone who is legally allowed to own a gun to carry it without paying for a state-issued license. Currently, he writes, Georgia gun owners must pay about $75, depending on the county probate court, to register with the state and pass a background check before being issued a license to carry a handgun in public. For some people, $75 is a pretty big deal. And when you hear people, and maybe follow me here, the opposition a lot of times to voter ID laws is that the voter ID, having to go get the ID in order to vote, is financially restrictive on the poorest of the poor. So why would you want to lock the people out who can't afford it, or who maybe aren't able to take the time, or they don't have access to information, whatever it may be? They say just requiring an ID to vote, to verify who you are, becomes financially restrictive on the poorest of the poor. So why wouldn't a $75 fee, which could feed people for quite some time, even with expensive grocery prices, but people who are being really economical, you can buy a lot of rice and tofu, and you can buy some ramen noodles. We've all done this type of thing going through college or in difficult times. You can feed yourself on $75 for a significant amount of time. And if it's choice between eating and having to spend the $75, I think people are going to eat. So, of course, this fee also affects the poorest of the poor. And the poorest of the poor, to be able to create an environment, a roadblock to be able to defend themselves, many times they live in the more difficult areas. If you're poor, you're not living in the gated community that has private security. No, you're living in an area where you need your own security, where the cops probably don't spend time protecting you. So that really is an important part of this. And part of the bill that Gertler, the text of the bill that Gertler filed, this is really important. He says, since objects or instrumentalities, I love this, in and of themselves are not dangerous or evil, in a free and just society, the civil government should not ban or restrict their possession or use. Boom. It's really great to include the philosophical statement. Generally, there's a number of, it depends on state drafting processes, but varies by state. But in many states, you can actually include a lot of statements of principles. They'll say, whereas statement, now therefore be it resolved or be it enacted. And then that's the enacting clause of the legislation, which has the legal effect. The first part, you're explaining what you're doing and why, the philosophical basis. And this in and of itself really sums up the whole approach here. In a free and just society, the civil government should not ban or restrict their possession or use, whatever it may be, because it's the actions of humans that are good or evil, not items themselves. The bill in Georgia seeks to repeal numerous sections of state law, TJ writes, related to places or situations in which a weapons permit is required for a person in order to possess firearms. It also seeks to repeal 2 provisions in state law. 1, a ban on carrying a firearm other than a handgun in a park, historic site, or recreational area. And 2, a requirement that residents who carry a handgun on those premises have a weapons carry permit. And I think it looks like he got a statement on this, or maybe got it from a press release or something. And Matt Gertler says, as it stands now, law-abiding Georgians are taxed millions of dollars annually for exercising their God-given natural rights, as I pointed out, natural rights of self-defense. Under the Constitution and in accordance with our founding fathers, shall not be infringed is a no-compromise statement. Kudos. We need more people with that kind of principle and that kind of backbone to move this issue forward. So if you live in Georgia, anywhere in the state of Georgia, make sure you visit the link in the show notes. Click House Bill 2. It's going to take you to the Georgia Legislature website. We're going to have to click House of Representatives. Find your lawmaker, and you can enter this. Follow this information. Enter your address. It'll tell you who your state senator and state representative is. And then email and call them. Say, I want you to support, co-sign, co-sponsor, support House Bill 2. And then if you live in Georgia and you're not on our email list, go to 10th and basically all the states, 10thamendmentcenter.com/register. When we get important updates to this bill, we will oftentimes send out action alerts to let you know who specifically needs to be targeted with a message to vote yes on the bill in committee. So House Bill 2, House Bill 2 in Georgia, House Bill 357 in Texas. The third bill comes from Oklahoma, from Senator Nathan Dahm. He filed SB 12. The state legislative session, I believe, starts not till around the first week of February 4th. So we won't get a committee assignment for that till shortly after, probably the very next day, or maybe just right around there. But for the time being, it's basically the same concept. Removing restrictions on the right to carry in Oklahoma code. So Senate Bill 12, same thing. It also allows, so this is only for people 21 and older. I'm not sure. I did not look and see if the bills in Texas or Georgia have that type of restriction. But it is a step forward. I know Dom, at least from what I've seen him talk about, that these restrictions shouldn't be on anybody. So if we're talking about our ultimate principle, like what Representative Gertler put in the Georgia bill, that there should be no restrictions on these instrumentalities. There should be none. And the bill itself is not necessarily getting all the way there, but it's establishing the principle in the legislation and then moving things forward. Then it is up to the people through human action to follow through and start showing, hey, we're going to more and more exercise our liberty. And that in and of itself, I think people will learn. I learned to not be afraid of the idea of gun culture, gun rights, Second Amendment people, because over time, when you spend time with people who are carrying, you feel safer. It's just, I don't know how to describe it, but you recognize over time, you learn through experience to be less fearful of what you don't know when you learn what it is. So positive bill in Oklahoma. If you live there, of course, again, click through. You want to support Senate Bill 12. And then the final state that we're covering is in South Carolina. There's actually 2 pieces of legislation in South Carolina. The first one comes from Senator Shane Martin. It is S-139. And under this proposed law, anyone who is legally allowed to own a gun could carry it without a state-issued license. Currently, and this is from TJ Martinell again, South Carolina gun owners must first attend training through a certified South Carolina CWP instructor before they can get a concealed weapons permit. And the bill then repeals numerous sections of the state law. It's basically getting rid of pieces of the state code that block people from being able to do this. And then the second bill, so of course you want to support Senate Bill 139 in South Carolina. The second bill comes from Representatives Michael Pitts and Brian White, who filed House Bill 3363. It's H3363. And this, again, amends sections of the code in state law currently. This is Section 2331.210.5 of the 1976 Code concerning concealable weapons so that they may be carried, concealed, or openly on one's person. It takes a small step, small but important step forward, removing the restrictions and now allowing, by removing these roadblocks to freedom, that people can have the choice to carry openly or concealed if they want. So this is really an open carry piece of legislation, and it complements the Senate Bill 139. So if you live in South Carolina, we want to support Senate Bill 139 and House Bill 3363. I'm not sure what the other gun rights organizations are doing in support of these bills. I know Gun Owners of America, GOA, gunowners.org, has always been extremely solid on this stuff. I've met Larry Pratt a number of times, and he's always been very supportive, not only of what we do on the right to keep and bear arms, but he's told me personally that like what we do is a general concept he's in favor of. So he's been very supportive of us, and I'm very grateful to be able to work with them when we can on bills that support the right to keep and bear arms on a state level. They're also the only national organization that has gotten behind and sent out action alerts and published things on their website to support efforts to nullify federal gun control directly, whereas a lot of the other organizations like the NRA have fought against us. Well, the NRA is really the only big one that has actually gone against us, trying to undermine our efforts there. So very grateful for GOA on this. EHP Training says Larry will be here on February 9th at the Bama Carry statewide convention. That's awesome. Existence says in the chat, I was in line at Cold Stone Creamery the other day, and 3 in line were open carrying, and I knew I was concealed carrying. That's the most safe ice cream place in the U.S. Yeah, man. I mean, the idea behind this is, and I don't own a firearm, but I live in Los Angeles. I had thought for a while of getting one of the really nice tasers, because where my office was before I moved here to my home, the spare bedroom that you can see if you're watching rather than listening to the podcast, spare bedroom that I've got some studio equipment set up, lighting and audio gear. But the only place I could afford a studio space was in Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. There are some people say that there's like 10,000 homeless people. Not that homeless people then in and of themselves are dangerous. A lot of times they're poor and weak and sick. I mean, they're always poor. But you find a lot of people with mental illnesses and drug addictions, and you don't know when someone's going to flip out on you and jump out at you, grab you, try to steal stuff, whatever. I have dealt with this, walking back and forth to Skid Row on a regular basis, and I shared an office with a good friend of mine who is a seamstress, or she was at the time a full-time seamstress, and man, she went through some crazy stuff to walk to Skid Row. And it's dangerous. So I thought of getting, a taser, which oddly enough, with all the gun restrictions here in California and in Los Angeles, there are 0 restrictions on the taser. But I think this might be part of my fear that I still have to get over. My fear in this situation was really the cops, because, and not the homeless people. A security guard actually recommended that I carry a police quality, like a mace pepper spray, which I got. And then I also got, I'm going to step away from the video here. I got this self-defense pen, which is, it's made out of airplane metal. So like for close quarters, at least I would carry this. And anytime I'm walking in an area that's, I know is going to be kind of dicey, I carry this guy with me. I mean, certainly it's not as good as being able to carry a firearm, but that's not really an option for me here. So I carry this. I also carry the pepper spray, but I was thinking of getting this taser. It has a laser sight on it. It has a little bit more distance. It's not one of these that you just walk up to somebody. The idea, the security guard at the building actually said, something like this, a lot of times if someone is being aggressive with you, just the laser sight on their chest is enough to make them run. But my fear was less about that than about the police in the area, which really do not seem to have a respect for the right to keep and bear arms. And I was afraid that if someone saw it, I would just be, I don't know, maybe I should still do it. I don't know if anybody has some advice on that. But I'm just kind of going off on that one. Anyway, so yesterday I mentioned not only was it the anniversary of George and Martha Washington's wedding day on the 6th, but I also went with my friends. I mentioned I went with my friends to the range. I don't go nearly enough. I really should start going a little bit more often, but it is expensive. So to rent the lane, you're paying during the week, it's $18 for a half hour. Plus $6 for an extra person, so $24. On the weekends, it's just $24. So $24. Then, of course, you're paying really expensive rates for the ammo. And I don't own a firearm, so I'm renting. That's, I got some pictures. There's me and Sarah. I posted this on my Facebook. Sarah, my partner of 15 years, we went to the range with a little group. There's her shooting. She's way better than I am. Her groupings are pretty good. Like, this was her first step. If you're watching, she literally, her first 3 shots were right in the white on this target. And she hasn't gone in years, probably 2-3 years that she's gone. So I use this Kimber 45. I think that's a 1911. So I shot a Kimber 45, which I really liked. I also shot my friend's 357, which I was a little uncomfortable. I couldn't really keep it steady. But I shot this Kimber 45, which I really liked. It felt really smooth. Now, I've read that it's not as good as a 9mm on penetration, things like that, but I feel like I'm much less inaccurate. I'm not going to say I'm more accurate. I'm much less inaccurate when I shoot that Kimber. It just feels really smooth. It's like a tank in my hand, so I'm able to keep it steady. The reason I'm pointing this out is I've always been kind of this non-self-defense guy. I'm an LA wimp compared to my gun rights friends in other states. But I think no matter where you live, if you believe in liberty, you should at least try to learn how to do the right thing on this. You should at least learn how to use these tools. So I'm trying to back up my words with action. So every now and then I go. I really should go more often. It's pretty expensive to do, but it was great. And I'm getting a little bit better. EHP training says Kimber Range. I love it. And the reason I grabbed it one of the first times I went was I was just asking when I went. And it's really cool that the people at this range, it's an indoor club in an old warehouse in the middle of an old warehouse district, industrial district here in downtown Los Angeles. And they were so great to kind of talk to me about the companies and where the guns were used. And they talked to me about Police Issue and Beretta and the Desert Eagle. And then I think they said this one was made in Montana. I'm like, I'm going with the Montana gun. And I shot the Montana gun. I've shot a Glock. I've shot a Beretta. I've shot the 357. For whatever reason, this feels the most comfortable for me. And maybe that's really the best approach. Instead of trying to get the best gun that has the best accuracy and in ratings, just go with whatever is best for you or best for me. And so far, this one is the most comfortable for me. Maybe I should learn how to use others, but I definitely don't go often enough. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I want to look over at the chat before we head out. This is a long episode today. Bob Brewer says, Rachel Malone of Gun Owners of America will be giving a lobbying class in Tyler, Texas at 2 p.m. Saturday, January 26th at the Holiday Inn in Tyler. That's great. GOA is actually very good at the lobbying. We can call it lobbying. I call it just activism. I think a lot of people are turned off by the idea of lobbying. They think lobbyists mean rich corporate people. But really, it's individual, it's citizen activist lobbying that really makes the most impact on the state level. So if we learn about a piece of legislation that's introduced, we definitely want to let our state representative and senator know about it. Then as that bill goes through the process, it's first going to be assigned to a committee. Then we want to do the same thing. Now, we only want to call people from our own district right at first. But once it goes to committee, the committee members are technically representing the whole state in making a decision on whether or not to consider the bill or pass the bill. So that means wherever you are in the state, you can call all the committee members and tell them, A, you support the bill, and B, you want to see them vote yes on it. You also want to be very courteous. Some people call and be like a total jerk. And you don't want to be condescending because, again, we're dealing with human beings. And the best way to do it is to be firm, strong in your convictions, but just respectful to another human being. Hey, I know you're on this committee, and I want to let you know that I strongly support. I'm a Texas resident. I strongly support House Bill 357, and I really want to see you vote yes on it. I know you've spoken out against this, whatever. The more that you know about the situation, the more you can talk about it. But of course, always be strong and just be courteous to the other person. And I think that is the most effective way. And the more that we do this, the more that people take these types of actions, the more that the bills move forward. When we monitor legislation, we see the ones move forward that more people do this on. So it's really, really important. Existence, yep, that's a 1911. EHP training, my wife carries a Kimber 1911 and 9mm. And Existence says, buy them all like I do. Bob Brewer, GOA is the real deal. Send them money. And Existence says, love GOA, NRA compromise. Okay, I've gone on long enough. This is kind of just a personal hangout at this point, but I appreciate you guys who have stuck around listening through all the legislation in South Carolina, Oklahoma, Texas, Georgia. We are going to be monitoring this particular issue, plus so many others. Surveillance, asset forfeiture, undermining the Federal Reserve as we move forward in the coming weeks. And, of course, over the next couple of months. And I appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope you found this interesting, insightful, educational. And I hope we can all take action to advance liberty in our own state because we cannot rely on Washington, D.C. To do the right thing. I appreciate you all joining with me today. I will be back, as always, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. And I hope you have a great day.